Here is our desktop application, which you can download locally. This is the login screen with fields with all the information required to log into a MySQL server and access a database. For this example, we just chose a sample database called employees. Let me just write in my password here and save the password. If we make a new tab, we can see that the password is stored correctly. In this field, you can see the runner, the monitor, and the agent. As you can see, by hovering over the text, you can see a better explanation of what these do. The runner is responsible for running queries, which will be recorded. The monitor is responsible for monitoring the resource usage of another session. And the agent is responsible for performing actions when runner and monitor are busy. Now we can run a query meant to generate some memory data. It takes a little while, so please stick with me here. Meanwhile, I can explain what's happening. First, the system sets up the monitoring. Then it runs the query while logging the memory use in time steps. Afterwards, it deals with any potential errors, gathers and processes data and stores it in memory. You can see which stage the recording is in below the input field. When this process is done, all the data is shown in the column to the right. So here we have a memory graph with the top 3 memory events, which uses the most memory. And here we can pick events and toggle them on or off. Let's just toggle off the geometry. And here the geometry has disappeared. You can see that it takes up a large amount of memory. You can also pick stages. Let me click on the end. But since this is a relatively simple query, all the stages will be either at the beginning or the end. You can also zoom in on interesting points in the graph by clicking and dragging. And zooming out is done by just clicking this button. Now let us try a simpler query. Here we can toggle on advanced options. The recording time step affects the graph on the right by either logging at smaller or larger time intervals. The default time step is 100 milliseconds, since our application's main purpose is to analyze long-running queries that might need optimization. We can also select a recording label here and a color. And now we are ready to record. Here you can see that the recording has been added to the list below with our selected label and color. There is no graph on the right since the query finished before the recording time step. But you can still view the results by showing the results table up here. This is also resizable. Now let me demonstrate our tab system. Let's create a new tab by clicking on this plus sign and connecting to it. Notice how the IDs are different between the tabs. We can change the label by clicking on these dots and edit tab label. It is also possible to edit the connection here. The purpose of having multiple tabs is to run multiple queries simultaneously. So let's demonstrate this by running a few queries. As you can see, both queries finished. Explain Analyze is a built-in profiling tool that shows where MySQL spends time on a query and why. The flame graph and tree view parses this output and presents it in a neat and interactive way, which could be useful in the analysis of both simple and complex queries. Now we will run a query with Explain Analyze. We can do this by either inserting it at the beginning of a query or clicking on this checkbox. Let us also label it. By scrolling down, we can see the output for both the explain analyze flame graph and the tree view, which both displays the same information. We can expand all the children in the tree view by clicking on this expand all button here. Each item in the flame graph represents one SQL operation. That is one line in the explain analyze output. The children represents underlying operations. Hovering the cursor over an item will display detailed information in the table below. We can also have this information stick around by clicking on an item. Items in the flame graph, when clicked, will expand, and the same item will be highlighted in the tree view. To get a more comprehensive overview of the execution of a query, we can look at the optimizer trace in this React JSON tree viewer. Here we can also expand all the children. It is also possible to save recordings to a file on your computer by clicking on the Save button in the recordings list. Now let us try to load the recording in a separate tab. We can do this by clicking on the Load Recording in the recordings list. Here we can see it has gotten a new label, but the information stays the same. The recordings list to the bottom left lets us view previously ran recordings. By clicking on these dots, we get additional options. So let's change the label and the color. Being able to change the label and the color of a previous recording are quality of life features that makes it easier to differentiate between the recordings. We can also copy our recording. Copying a previous recording's query is beneficial in the situation that one wants to rerun or make small adjustments to a previously ran query. It is also possible to just remove a recording. In this field, you can search through the labels.